I turned onto our street, feeling a familiar warmth swell in my chest. Our house, small, modest, but so full of memories, came into view just past the bend. A month on the road, 1,000 miles behind me, hundreds of hours behind the wheel, and finally, I was home. The cab of the truck was silent. The radio was off, the engine hummed and idle, but my mind buzzed with anticipation. Today was my birthday, and it seemed my family had planned a surprise for me. As I pulled into the driveway, my first thought was, God, it feels good to be home. Standing on the porch was Lisa, my wife, with a wide smile lighting up her face. Beside her was Jake, my best friend, who seemed to be helping her carry something from the house. My kids, Sammy and Emma, had already burst outside, shouting, "Dad's home! Dad's home!" Leaving the engine running, I climbed out of the cab and was immediately tackled by my two little hurricanes. Emma, my youngest, clung to me so tightly that I had to crouch down to keep from toppling over. Sammy proudly showed off his new baseball glove. "How was the trip?" Lisa asked as she came closer, hugging me over the kids' heads. Her scent, a light mix of vanilla and lavender, always reminded me that I was where I belonged. "Long but good," I replied, pulling back to look into her eyes. She looked a little tired, but still as beautiful as the day we met. "Happy birthday, Dad!" the kids shouted in unison. I laughed and scooped Emma up into my arms. "Thanks, kiddos." "So, who's been planning surprises for the old man?" An hour later, I was sitting at the table in the living room. Everything was just as I dreamed during those long weeks on the road. A birthday cake, presents from the kids, and even Jake, my best friend from college, was there. Lisa had gone all out, baking my favorite apple cinnamon pie, and the kids had made handmade cards. The biggest surprise, though, was the arrival of Lisa's parents. They lived just a couple of streets over, and were always ready to lend a hand or stop by for dinner. Tom and Mary were salt-of-the-earth people. Tom, a retired veteran, still had a firm handshake and a sharp wit, while Mary adored her grandkids and was the quintessential homemaker. "So, son, how are the roads treating you?" Tom asked, offering me his strong handshake. "Hope you're not working yourself too hard." "Pretty smooth this time, Tom," I replied, shaking his hand. "But I'll admit, it feels a lot better being here than out on the highway." Mary came over to hug me, giving my shoulder a gentle pat. "Ben, we're so proud of you. You're such a hard worker, a real family man. Lisa's always saying how lucky she is to have you." "Thanks, Mary," I said, feeling a little embarrassed. "Honestly, I couldn't do it without your daughter. She's my rock, my home." Mary smiled warmly, looking at Lisa with maternal pride. The only thing missing from the evening was my parents. They lived in Arizona, nearly 1,500 miles away, and rarely had the chance to visit. Lisa and I had once considered moving closer to them, but in the end, we decided to stay here in the Midwest, where her family was and where our kids were growing up. "Your parents send their love," Lisa said during dinner. "They wanted to call, but with all the noise, I don't think you'd have heard them anyway." I smiled, though a small pang of sadness tugged at me. I wished my mom and dad could be here, but I understood the distance made it tough. Tom, ever the spirited host, raised his beer for a toast. "To Ben, the hardest working man I know. He keeps this family going and always comes home with a smile, no matter what. Here's to you, kid, keep it up." Everyone joined in the toast, and I raised my beer can with a grin. After dinner, I stepped out onto the backyard patio to enjoy a moment of quiet. The night was warm, and the stars shone brightly overhead. I looked out at our yard, the swing set I'd built for the kids, and the small garden where Lisa grew her favorite tomatoes and herbs. Life felt almost perfect. "What are you thinking about?" Lisa asked, coming up behind me. "Oh, just the road, the house." I turned to face her. "You and the kids, you're everything that matters to me. I think about that a lot when I'm driving those empty highways." She sat beside me, wrapping her arm around my shoulders. "We're always waiting for you, Ben. You know that." I nodded, pulling her close, feeling that same tenderness that had always been between us. Lisa was my anchor, my home, my everything. As the evening wound down, the kids fell asleep, and Jake and her parents said their goodbyes, leaving just the two of us. I went upstairs, watching as Lisa tucked Emma in. The house was filled with that special kind of silence that only comes after a family celebration, when everything feels just right. I climbed into bed, thinking about how lucky I was to have this life. Tomorrow, I'd hit the road again. But tonight was one of those rare days that fueled me to keep going. I had no idea it would be the last night I'd ever feel like I had everything. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains in our bedroom, casting a soft glow across the quiet room. I woke up before my alarm, as I always did before the start of a new trip. Beside me, Lisa was still fast asleep, her blonde hair spread across the pillow. I lay there for a moment, watching her, marveling at how lucky I was. We'd been married for over 10 years, but even after all this time, she was just as beautiful to me as the day I first saw her at a friend's birthday party. I didn't want to wake her, but work wouldn't wait. I carefully slipped out of bed, trying not to disturb her, and pulled on my jeans and a t-shirt. The air outside was still cool, so I grabbed my favorite jacket from the hook by the door. As I headed downstairs, I heard the familiar creak of the stairs behind me. Lisa. She was already up, even though I'd hoped to let her sleep in. "Were you planning to sneak out without saying goodbye?" she asked with a sleepy smile, yawning as she pulled her robe over her shoulders. "I didn't want to wake you," I said, smiling back. "But you know me. I can't hit the road without your coffee." She smirked and headed into the kitchen. A few minutes later, 2 mugs of coffee and a freshly buttered slice of toast were on the table. We sat in the quiet of the early morning, savoring the calm before the day began and the kids woke up. "What's your route this time?" she asked, leaning her elbows on the table and looking at me. "Omaha first, then Denver. Picking up a load for California after that, and we'll see where it goes from there. Should take about 3 weeks if everything goes smoothly." She nodded, her brows furrowing slightly. "You always say that, if everything goes smoothly. But something always happens on the road, Ben. It's part of the job, Lise. You know that. Don't worry, I'll be fine." She reached across the table and touched my hand. "Just be careful, okay? I need you." I squeezed her hand, feeling that familiar sense of comfort and security that only she could give me. The kids woke up just as I was about to head out. Sammy, as always, had something new to show me. This time, it was a trick he'd learned on his bike. Emma ran outside barefoot, holding up a drawing of our family. "Here, Daddy, so you don't get lonely," she said, handing me the picture. It showed our house, me behind the wheel of my truck, with Lisa and the kids standing beside it. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll hang it in the cab," I said, smiling. Lisa hugged me tightly, her fingers trembling slightly as she held on. "We're going to miss you," she whispered. "I'll miss you too," I said, pulling her close. "I'll be back before you know it." I leaned down and kissed her. That moment was always the hardest, letting go of her, of home, of everything that mattered most to me, and heading back out on the road. The engine of my truck rumbled to life as I started it up. Lisa and the kids stood on the porch, waving. I waved back, feeling the familiar pang of sadness, and pulled onto the road. The trip ahead would be long, but this was my job, this was my life. As I drove down the highway, the city began to wake up around me. The sun climbed higher, bathing the fields and farms along the road in golden light. In moments like these, I felt like, despite the challenges, I was living the right life. Everything I did was for them. But a few hours into the trip, something went wrong. I just left the interstate and turned onto the road leading to my first pickup when I heard a strange grinding noise. Then, a warning light blinked on the dashboard. Something was wrong with the transmission. "Not now," I muttered, pulling over to the shoulder. Climbing out, I opened the hood, hoping it was something minor. But the more I looked, the more it became clear that I wasn't going to fix this on my own. I tried calling the mechanic I usually worked with, but he wasn't available. "Great," I muttered, climbing back into the cab and searching for the nearest service station. I found one about 10 miles away and started the engine again. The truck struggled to move, barely inching forward. Whatever the issue was, it was worse than I'd thought. "Looks like I'm heading to the shop," I said to myself, taking a deep breath. It wasn't the first time I dealt with mechanical trouble, but something about today felt different. Deep down, I had a feeling this was just the beginning of a long, difficult day. The service station was located on the outskirts of a small town, one of those places where seasoned mechanics could work on anything from aging sedans to massive rigs. As I pulled into the lot, the air was thick with the sounds of honking, the screech of tools, and the smell of oil. I parked my truck near the entrance and shut off the engine, which already sounded like it was on its last leg. "Good morning." I called toward the garage as I stepped out of the cab. A man in a grease-streaked uniform appeared from behind the hood of an old truck. His name tag read Matt. Wiping his hands on a rag, he squinted against the sunlight as he walked toward me. "What V you got?" he asked, eyeing my rig. "Transmission issues. Warning lights on. There's a nasty grinding sound when I shift gears," I explained. Matt nodded, tossing the rag onto a workbench. He motioned for me to bring the truck into the garage. "Fire it up. Let's have a listen." I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and carefully shifted gears. The grinding noise returned, loud and grating, like nails on a chalkboard. Matt winced. "That's not good," he muttered as I killed the engine. For the next few hours, the mechanics worked on my truck while I sat in a small waiting area with plastic chairs and a vending machine for coffee. I made calls to the logistics team, letting them know the delivery would be delayed, and they scrambled to find a replacement driver. Finally, Matt approached me, wiping his hands with the same rag. "I've got news for you," he began, and I immediately knew it wasn't going to be good. "It's serious. The transmission system needs a complete overhaul. It'll take at least a week, maybe 2. We've got to order parts, and shipping takes time." My heart sank. A week or 2. That was a blow. On the road, time was money, and every delay meant lost income. "Is there any way to speed this up?" I asked, grasping at straws. Matt shook his head. "We'll do what we can, but this isn't a quick fix. Machines don't exactly break down on a schedule." I sighed, running a hand over my face. "All right, do what you have to do," I said, resigning myself to the situation. "Call me when it's ready." "Will do," Matt replied with a nod. "There's a motel nearby if you want to stay in town. Or, judging by your plates, you live close enough to head home." "Yeah, I'm not too far," I admitted, realizing I could just drive back home. Sitting behind the wheel of an old pickup loaned to me by the shop, I debated my next move. Heading straight home didn't feel right. Instead, I decided to surprise Lisa and the kids. They had no idea I'd be back. A grin spread across my face as I imagined Sammy's excitement over his new baseball glove and Emma's joy at her favorite chocolate. I pulled into a small grocery store on the town's main street. Wandering the aisles, I enjoyed the rare chance to pick out things my family would love. I grabbed a box of chocolate truffles for Lisa, a couple of toys for the kids, and their favorite cookies. At the checkout, the elderly cashier smiled warmly. "For your family?" she asked. "Yeah," I replied, heading home with a surprise. "They're going to be thrilled," she said, beaming. "Good luck to you." I nodded, murmuring a quick "thank you," and headed out to the truck. Sitting behind the wheel, I felt a flutter of excitement. This was going to be perfect, seeing their faces light up with surprise and joy. I started the engine and began the short drive home. The road was familiar, every curve and bump etched into my memory. Summer fields stretched out on either side, glowing in the warm evening light. As the house came into view, something struck me as odd. There was a truck parked in the driveway. A red pickup, Jack's truck. My heart began to race. Jack, my best friend, usually visited when I was home, but he knew I was supposed to be on a long-haul trip. Maybe something happened, I thought, though a knot of unease tightened in my chest. I slowed the pickup and pulled over to the side of the road to collect my thoughts. Too many questions swirled in my mind. Why was he here? Why was his truck parked in my driveway when no one knew I'd be back? I exhaled, feeling a chill run down my spine. Maybe I'm overthinking this. Maybe there's a good reason for him to be here. But something deep inside whispered that this wasn't just a coincidence. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, I took a deep breath and steered the pickup toward the house. As I turned onto the driveway, the strange sense of unease grew stronger. Normally, by this time, the house would be glowing with life. I knew the routine by heart. The kids watching cartoons in the living room, Lisa busy in the kitchen or reading in her favorite corner. But now, the house was dark and eerily silent, as if no one was home. I cut the engine and sat in the borrowed pickup for a moment, listening. Nothing. No laughter, no muffled sounds of the TV, just the chirping of cicadas outside. It felt wrong, unnatural. Stepping out of the truck, I grabbed the bag of toys and treats I'd bought for my family. The excitement I'd felt earlier about surprising them had vanished, replaced by a cold weight in my chest. Clutching the bag tightly, I walked slowly toward the door. When I unlocked it and stepped inside, I was met with a familiar aroma, cooked meat and red wine. I set the bag down in the hallway and flicked on the lights. The first thing I noticed was a pair of boots by the door. Jack's boots. His old, worn work boots stood neatly beside a folded jacket. My heart sank. My mind raced to explain it away. Maybe he came over to help with something. Maybe something happened with the kids. But deep down, I already knew the truth before I saw the rest. I walked into the living room. On the coffee table were 2 glasses of red wine, one of them half full. Next to them was a bottle of Robert Mondavi Cabernet Sauvignon 2018, the wine I'd bought for our anniversary. Lisa had refused to open it back then, saying it was special. And there it was, open and half drunk, like it was just another random night. On the plates were half-eaten steaks, the knives and forks still lying next to them, as if they'd been abandoned in a hurry. I stared at the scene, frozen in place, as though looking at someone else's life. My mind raced with questions. Why? How? When? My hand clenched into a fist. My blood boiled, and I felt the heat rise to my face. Lisa? I called out, my voice hoarse and strained. There was no answer. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I climbed the stairs. Each step echoed like a drumbeat in my mind, signaling the disaster waiting for me at the top. As I ascended, I began to hear faint voices. Quiet laughter. His voice. Her voice. My head spun. When I reached the landing, I already knew what I was about to see. But knowing didn't soften the blow. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and light spilled out through the crack. The laughter had stopped, replaced by low murmurs I couldn't make out. I don't remember deciding to move forward, but suddenly I was at the door. I pushed it open hard, and it slammed against the wall. The scene before me froze them both. Lisa let out a startled scream, pulling the blanket up over herself. Jack sat up, wide-eyed, like a kid caught stealing candy. Ben, what are you doing here? Lisa stammered, her voice trembling. You're supposed to be on the road. Supposed to be on the road? I repeated, my voice rising with the fury boiling inside me. Supposed to be on the road, so you two could do this behind my back? In my house? In my bed? Jack scrambled to his feet, fumbling to pull on his jeans. Ben, I can explain, he started, but I raised a hand to stop him. Shut your mouth, Jack. I don't need your explanation. My voice was low, cold as ice. The only thing I need is for you to leave. Now. He hesitated, glancing at Lisa as if searching for support, but she stayed silent, her hands covering her mouth. I turned my gaze to her. And you, I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts. You didn't even try to hide it. You knew I'd come back, that I'd find out someday. But you just kept going. It's not what you think, she finally said, her voice barely audible and pleading. Ben, it just got complicated. Complicated? I laughed bitterly. Lisa, we've been married for 10 years. We have 2 kids. And you call this complicated? She reached out toward me, but I stepped back. Don't touch me, I said, turning my face away. You're disgusting to me. Meanwhile, Jack had managed to get his jeans and shirt back on. He took a hesitant step toward the door, but I stopped him with a glare. You betrayed me, Jack, I said quietly, each word landing like a hammer. You were my best friend. You sat at my table. You played with my kids. And all this time, how could you? He opened his mouth to speak, but thought better of it. His face was etched with guilt, but I didn't care anymore. Get out, I growled, and he finally left, leaving the 2 of us in suffocating silence. Lisa sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the blanket to her chest. Her eyes were red and swollen with tears. Ben, please let me explain, she said. No, Lisa. I shook my head, the weight of everything crushing me. There's no explanation that can fix this. I turned and walked out, leaving her there. As I closed the door behind me, my knees threatened to buckle, but I forced myself to keep moving. I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed bedroom door. My chest burned, with anger, pain, and betrayal. My hands trembled, and my thoughts scattered like wild birds, refusing to settle. I tried to breathe deeply, but every breath felt insufficient, as though the air in the house itself had turned foreign. I went back downstairs, leaving Lisa behind, and sat on the couch. Was this really my life? Had I spent so many years with someone who could betray me like this? But the question that kept pounding in my mind was, where are the kids? Lisa came down a few minutes later. She was wearing a robe, her hair disheveled, her face streaked with tears. I stood abruptly, turning to face her. Where are the kids? I demanded, not bothering to hide my anger. Where are Sammy and Emma? She lowered her gaze. They're at my parents' house, she said quietly. I thought it would be better for them to spend the night there. That was the final straw. Your parents? I took a step toward her, my voice rising. Your parents know too? Do they know you're cheating on me with my best friend? She said nothing. Her eyes darted away, like a cornered animal searching for an escape. Of course they know, I spat through clenched teeth. Because in your family, lying and betrayal must be normal. Lisa opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, silencing her. Don't. Just don't, I said. You've destroyed everything. Absolutely everything. I walked to the window, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. Her silence was louder than any words. I couldn't stand to hear excuses or attempts to justify what she'd done. It was beyond justification. Sitting at the table, I began piecing together a plan in my head. This couldn't go without consequences. I couldn't trust Lisa anymore, but the kids were different. They were all that mattered now. I wouldn't leave them with someone who had put her selfish desires above their well-being. I looked up at Lisa, my voice cold. Tomorrow, I'm filing for divorce. You understand that, don't you? She covered her face with her hands, but said nothing. Her silence only fueled my anger. I'm filing for full custody, I continued. You're not fit to be their mother. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed them. How are you going to explain this to them? She lowered her hands, her eyes brimming with tears. Ben, please, don't take the kids away from me. It was a mistake, A mistake? I cut her off, my voice sharp. You call this a mistake? Lisa, you knew exactly what you were doing. And your parents clearly supported you, didn't they? Her silence answered for her. My chest tightened, but I knew I had to remain composed. Tomorrow, I'm going to get the kids, I said, staring at her with steely resolve. They belong here, in their home, with me. And you can start packing. Early the next morning, I got into the borrowed truck and drove to her parents' house. The drive was short, but every turn on the road echoed in my mind. Their house, warm and well-kept, had always seemed like a symbol of comfort and support. Now, I looked at it with a different perspective. I parked, got out, and walked up to the door. After a few seconds, Mary, Lisa's mother, opened it. Her face lit up with a faint smile, but there was something in her eyes that made me tense. Ben, you're here early, she said. The kids are still having breakfast. I'm here to take them home, I said curtly. We're leaving. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of concern. She stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. In the living room, Tom, Lisa's father, sat with a cup of coffee. He looked up and nodded when he saw me. Something wrong, Ben? You look upset, he began. I stopped at the doorway, my gaze darting between the two of them. Yes, something's wrong, I said, my voice firm. Did you know your daughter is cheating on me? They exchanged a quick glance, and in that moment, I knew. They'd known all along. Mary sighed, as if this conversation was inevitable. Ben, we're sorry this happened, she began softly. But maybe you should think about why it happened. Why it happened? I repeated, anger rising again. Are you seriously trying to blame me? We're not blaming you, Tom interjected. But Ben, you're always on the road. Lisa felt lonely. It's not an excuse, but you still supported her, I interrupted. You knew she was lying to me. You knew she was tearing our family apart. And you did nothing. Mary folded her hands in her lap. We just want you both to find a way to work through this without destroying everything. I shook my head, staring at them in disbelief. Destroying everything? It's already destroyed. She destroyed it. And you helped her. At that moment, the kids ran into the living room, their faces lighting up when they saw me. Their joy cut through my anger like a beam of light through a storm. They were the only reason I was still standing, the only thing worth fighting for. We're leaving, I said gently to them. Let's go pack your things. Mary tried to stop me. Ben, please think of the children. They need a stable home, with both of you. I turned to her, my voice icy. That's exactly why they're coming with me. Because I know what stability means. I didn't wait to hear more. Taking the kids by the hand, I walked them out of the house without looking back. 6 months had passed since that night, the night that shattered my life. 6 months since I lost everything I thought was unbreakable and began rebuilding my life from the ground up. This new reality was filled with less pain and more determination. I didn't just survive. I took control, reclaiming everything that had been taken from me. Despite the losses, I knew I now had a future. But the journey to this point had been far from easy. The morning after that night, I contacted a lawyer and began the divorce process. I wasn't about to leave anything to chance. My demands were clear: full custody of the kids, with Lisa only allowed visitation on a strict schedule. My attorney, Rebecca Grayson, was a force of nature. Her cool determination kept me focused on my primary goal, protecting my children. Lisa fought back, and her attorney pushed for compromises, but I refused to back down. Every time I looked at Sammy and Emma, I reminded myself why I was doing this. My children deserved a stable, loving home, not the chaos Lisa's choices had created. The court battle lasted 3 months. I provided evidence of Lisa's infidelity, witness statements, and even photographs proving her relationship with Jack. Her parents tried to defend her, blaming me for leaving her alone too often, but their arguments crumbled under the weight of the facts. The judge, an elderly man with gray hair and a stern demeanor, delivered the verdict in my favor. Custody of the children is awarded to Benjamin Warner, he declared in the courtroom. The mother will have visitation rights on the first and third Saturdays of each month, under the supervision of a social worker. Lisa sat across from me, tears streaming down her face. Her usually confident and beautiful expression was now broken. But I felt no pity for her. She had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. After the court ruling, Lisa's life changed drastically. She moved back in with her parents, living in a small room that had once belonged to her sister. The house, now legally mine, remained the home for me and the kids. I knew it was the right decision. They needed the familiarity and security of the place where they'd grown up. Her parents tried to involve themselves in our lives, but I cut off all contact with them. In court, I had made it clear that they had known about Lisa's affair and supported her, hiding it from me. The judge took this into account when issuing his decision, and they were no longer allowed to see the kids without my permission. At first, they called, sent letters, and even showed up at the house. But I stood firm. My family didn't need them anymore. Jack didn't escape unscathed either. His reputation in our small town was destroyed. Word of his betrayal spread quickly, and everyone who knew us turned their backs on him. He was quietly fired from his job, unofficially, of course, but everyone knew it was due to the pressure from his colleagues. He tried to find support among his friends, but even those who once trusted him avoided him now. I heard he moved to another town to start over, but he couldn't outrun his reputation. Social media and small-town gossip made sure of that. Now, months later, I had finally started to find peace. My mornings began with making breakfast for the kids. Sammy and Emma were laughing again, their eyes bright with joy. We spent more time together than ever before. I had even cut back on my long-haul trips to be with them. These days were precious to me. One morning, as we ate breakfast on the porch, Emma looked at me with her big, serious eyes. "Daddy, are you ever going to leave again?" she asked. I took a deep breath, steadying my emotions. "No, sweetheart," I said. "I'm staying right here with you." She smiled and went back to her cereal, and I felt a warm glow spread through my chest. I knew I had made the right choice. Lisa still saw the kids twice a month. Those visits were always tense. The kids loved her, but their relationship with her had changed. They sensed she was no longer part of their home. Each time they returned, they told me about their time with her, but there was a cautious tone in their voices, as though they didn't want to say too much. I avoided asking too many questions, not wanting to burden them further. My life now revolved around the kids and rebuilding what had been broken. I hired someone to help me renovate the house, repainting walls, rearranging furniture, and creating a fresh atmosphere free from the shadows of the past. Every evening, as I tucked the kids into bed, I reflected on how far we'd come. We had lost so much, but we had held on to what mattered most, each other. And that was enough. This chapter of my life had reached its end. I had put a bold period at the end of it. Now, I knew I would never let anyone destroy my life again. That knowledge gave me the strength to keep moving forward.